Kia ora koutou katoa, e te mana whenua o nau tuarihi tēnā koutou. E nā pūkenga, e nā ahorangi, e nā ākonga mā, tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mai, haere mai te kura umanga. A mei ana te whakatoki, mata huru huru ka rere te manu. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Ballantyne, the Executive Dean of Te Kura Umanga, the UC Business School. And it's my privilege to welcome you here tonight for this 2023 Condliffe Memorial Lecture. The Condliffe Memorial Lecture was instituted in 2005 to honour John Bell Condliffe. In 1921, John Condliffe became the first Professor of Economics at what was then Canterbury University College, after leaving Christchurch to serve in the New Zealand Expeditionary Force in France in World War I and studying at Cambridge University. In 1931, he joined the Economic Secretariat of the League of Nations. There he wrote the first 6 issues of the League's World Economic Survey. Condliffe then went on to become a Professor of Economics at a different UC, UC Berkeley, from 1940 to 1953, and was an economist at the Stanford Research Centre until 1970. Throughout his international career, Condliffe never lost interest in New Zealand, publishing New Zealand in the Making in 1930, The Welfare State in New Zealand in 1959, and a biography of his friend Te Rangi Hiroa, who was more commonly known as Sir Peter Buck, in 1971. He received an honorary knighthood in 1977 for his services to the Commonwealth, and is described in the Dictionary of New Zealand as one of the country's best-known international economists. The Condliffe Memorial Lecture Series brings together leading economists to Canterbury to provide a public lecture highlighting their recent work and its relevance to the broader business and policy community. It has been held annually since 2005, of course, unfortunately, with the exception of 2020 due to it being a COVID year. That year, 2020, marked the 100-year anniversary of the establishment of the Economics Department here at the University of Canterbury. And this year marks the 150th anniversary of this university, with the Condliffe Memorial Lecture being one of the key events being put on by the Business School. The Condliffe Memorial Lecture Series has included as distinguished speakers world-leading economists, one of whom so far received a Nobel Prize in Economics after delivering the lecture. And that, of course, is David Card, Condliffe Lecturer in 2014 and Nobel Prize winner in 2021. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have a preeminent leader in the fields of behavioural economics and neuroeconomics speaking to us. And I would like to invite the head of our Department of Economics and Finance, Professor Jędrzej Białkowski, to introduce this year's speaker. Jędrzej, over to you.
Well, before I will have a pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker, I need to talk about some housekeeping, because we are living in interesting times. So let's start with some housekeeping. First, to find the toilets, you walk towards the lifts and you will find them tucked away on the right. Then we have emergency exit, where they are at the back of the room, and on the left. Then please use external stairs and go to the lecture theaters. This apply also in case of a fire. So please use exit buildings and don't use the lifts. In case of the earthquakes, drop, cover and hold. And once the shaking ends, then exit the building using the stairs. And follow us to get meeting in the Clyde Road car park, or just follow others. And then the new important housekeeping. If we get notification about a police enforced lockdown, remain inside, take cover and stay away from the windows. Waiting for USC emergency personnel to give us further instruction. If you happen to be outside, enter nearest the building, and if it is locked, leave the campus for a safe location. So let me introduce Professor George Lofstein. He received a PhD at Yale University in 1985. Then he started his career at University of Chicago, where he was assistant and associate professor, before he moved to Carnegie Mellon University in 1990. Professor Lofstein research focused on application of psychology to economics, and more recently, and it is very intriguing, application economics to the psychology. Professor Lofstein research has great influence. He has published 30 articles in peer journals in economics, psychology, law, medicine, and other fields. He is the author of numerous book chapters, and he written or edited 6 books. He is co-author or author of his work received 50,000 citations according to Scopus, and close to 150,000 in Google Scholar. What is very remarkable about Professor Lofstein is that he helped to found the field of behavioral economics. He is one of the pioneers in neuroeconomics, and this makes our speaker particularly important. Additionally, he has served in multiple panels like National Academy of Science, Institute of Medicine, and he advised a numerous corporation and government organization. And one, I think, interesting remark about Professor George Lofstein is his grandson on Sigmund and Martha Freud. So without further delay, I have a pleasure to welcome Professor George Lofstein, and I look forward, as together with the audience, for your insightful presentation.
Thank you. That was very generous. I'm actually the great-grandson, a little bit more remote. But, okay. So I'm not really used to presenting to kind of such diverse audiences. I think there's the youngest audience member I've ever had in my life. I think maybe it's very likely that I bracket the top of the age distribution in this room. But I haven't been around quite as long as the economics department here. So hopefully you've had time to digest the Shakespeare quote, which is sort of in line with the theme of the talk that I'm going to be giving, which is about the economics of information. And there's a lot of young people in this audience. I'm going to start out a little bit academic, and then I think it will become much more accessible, because what I'm going to be talking about are a lot of the movements that are happening now and are accelerating, particularly for young people. So anyway, so a little bit of background on the economics of information. George Stigler, he pioneered what's called the economics of information in 1961. So economists often assume that what we care about is how much we consume, like maybe also about how much leisure we have. Stigler introduced the idea that information is really important for economics. In an article titled Economics of Information, he argued that information is a scarce commodity, like any other commodity that can be bought and sold. And he believed that information is valued to the extent that it aids decision-making, and only to that extent. The only reason that we value information is because it helps us to make better decisions. One implication of Stigler's perspective is that valid information should never be avoided. We should never avoid getting information if we think it's good information. When Stigler collected the Nobel Prize for his work, and when he collected the prize in his acceptance speech, he wrote that what he was doing was uncontroversial. He wrote, "The absence of controversy was due to the fact that no established scientific theory was being challenged by this work. All I challenged was the neglect of a promising subject." I don't know if there are any graduate students in this room, but this is what I always advise graduate students to do, to work on issues that are neglected, but that don't challenge other people's work. Because otherwise, when you submit a paper, there are lots of axes raised, ready to strike it down. In the 1970s, we had what's called the new economics of information. And this is all the implications that follow from the fact that different people possess different information, obvious insight. And let me just give you, and 3 people were a part of that. They all won the Nobel Prize together. So it seems to be a good project. It seems to be a good project to work on. And maybe Card, having come here before, maybe that's a good that's a good sign. Anyway, I'll give you one example. George Akerlof did some pioneering work on the market for lemons. So suppose you have a car and you want to sell your car, but you know a lot more about your car than any possible buyer knows. And so you might know that your car is really great, but they don't know how great your car is. And so they are not going to offer you as much money as maybe you know the car is worth. And so let's say you own this great car and you decide, because I can't sell it, because nobody will buy it from me for what it's worth, I'm going to withdraw it from the market. Now, the really good cars are now out of the market. What's left is not such great cars. But the people, and everybody knows that not such great cars are left over, but the people who own the better cars know that they have a good, not so great car, but all the potential buyers don't know that. And so they don't want to buy. And what you can get is an unraveling of a market where no one wants to buy the used car. Actually, if you drive a new car off the lot, it depreciates by about 20 to 30% instantaneously. It's worth 20 to 30%. I know I'm using jargony terms. It's worth 20 to 30% the moment you drive it off the lot. Because let's say you immediately try to sell it. What's going to happen? The potential buyer is going to say, "Oh, I don't want to buy that car. There's probably a reason why he's selling it so quickly." All right. It's often said that we are now in the age of information, given like the emergence of the internet. And I've been wondering whether it's time for a new economics of information, hence the title of the talk. Here's a book about, it's weirdly titled The Information, but it's a history, a theory, a flood. It's about the information revolution. Sometimes for some talks I give, I put on one of these kind of bogus graphs about how the amount of information we are being flooded with is expanding and multiplying every day. I'm sure you've seen graphs like that. All right, what would be the foundation for a new economics of information? I think it would be a movement in economics that's called belief-based utility. So economists assume that people maximize their utility. We act to maximize our happiness. Utility is basically, this is a bit simplistic, but utility is basically happiness. And that everything we do is trying to maximize our happiness. Belief and economists usually assume that what we care about, as I said earlier, is how much we consume. So standard economics assumes that utility, happiness, derives from what we consume, maybe leisure. Information Just like Stigler assumed, information is only valued to the extent that it improves decision-making and increases consumption. The central insight of belief-based utility and of the new economics of information is the idea that most pleasures and pains that we experience are in our minds. I bet everybody in this room has enough to eat or probably sufficiently warm, so we have no trouble surviving. And our happiness is largely determined by what's in our mind, what we're thinking about, what our beliefs are. Are we good people? Are we good looking? Are we smart? Is the world a benign place? And so on. And this has been a big theme of my work, but Thomas Schelling, another Nobel Prize winner, wrote a brilliant book chapter titled "The Mind as a Consuming Organ," which is probably the first chapter about the idea that all of our utility is in the mind. I wrote a paper in 1987, same year, titled "Anticipation and the Valuation of Delayed Consumption." And in this paper, I talked about the idea that we get a lot of utility, pleasure and pain from thinking about the future, not just from the present, what we consume in the present, but also from thinking about the future. I think I wrote that article because I failed my comprehensive exam, and I was very anxious about what was going to happen in the future. I was like dwelling on the future, and I think that's what gave me the insight that a lot of happiness and unhappiness is about thinking about the future. I then wrote a book book chapter with a guy named Jan Elster on the idea that we get utility not only from anticipation, but also from memory. And I summarized a lot of this work in a paper in Science titled "The Pleasures and Pains of Information." What are the consequences of belief-based utility? It has very far-reaching consequences for economics. So standard economics assumes that people are what's called Bayesian, that we rationally update beliefs based on new information. When we get new information, we have existing beliefs, we get new information, and we update what we believe based on the new information that we get. And we do that, standard economics assumes, in an optimal fashion. Once you take into account the idea that happiness and unhappiness are all in our head, and that happiness and unhappiness determines how our beliefs determine how good we feel, it follows that people are going to be motivated to hold certain beliefs because they feel good or they fit into the sense that we've made of the world. We like to have beliefs that fit with our pre-existing perspective on the world. And a consequence of this is that we process evidence in a biased fashion. And this is referred to as motivated cognition. Let's say we get some new information and it points to something that we don't want to believe. We process the new information in a biased fashion. We think, oh, sorry, this is something we do want to believe. Let's say we get some weak information about something that we do want to believe. Then we process it in a biased fashion. We think to ourselves, can I believe this? I really want to believe this. Can I believe this? And if you don't want to believe something, then you process it in the opposite way. You process it by thinking, do I have to believe this? Is there any way to get around what the implications are of the information that I'm receiving? People also get attached to their beliefs and defend their beliefs like they would defend possessions. So Robert Abelson, who was actually a psychologist and one of my advisors in graduate school, he wrote a book chapter titled "Beliefs Are Like Possessions." And he highlighted all the different ways that we treat beliefs, not at all the way that social sciences assume that we treat beliefs, but we often treat beliefs like they're cherished possessions. And we don't want to give them up. And we defend them. If we think somebody else is attacking our beliefs, we defend them in the same way that we would defend our material possessions. Here's a question. Do you think that people who are more knowledgeable about science are more likely to believe in the reality of climate change or are less likely to believe in the reality of climate change? Let's ask one of our young, we have 4 young people. One of you, do you think that people who are more knowledgeable about science are more likely to believe in the reality of climate change or less likely? Yes. More likely, thank you. And actually, it's not a trick question. You're right. Ordinary science intelligence measured by a test and probability of giving the correct response to the question, is the Earth getting warmer, mostly because of human activities such as burning fossil fuels, which is the correct answer, or because of natural patterns in the Earth's environment. Okay, not so interesting, exactly what you'd predict. What is interesting, though, is if you, in the United States, if you compare Democrats, they're the blue, and Republicans, they are the red, you see that it's the exact opposite pattern. So the Republicans, the more they know about science, the less they believe in the reality of climate change. But the Democrats, the more they believe in science, the more they know about science, the more they believe in the reality of climate change. How could that be? Any guess? Maybe from a young person? How could it be that the more, if you're a Republican, the more you know, the better you are at science, the less you believe in climate change? Any idea? Well, one possible explanation is that people use their intelligence not to sift through the evidence in an unbiased fashion, but people use their intelligence, their scientific intelligence, to arrive at the conclusion that they want to arrive at. And Republicans in the United States don't believe in, most of them don't believe in climate change, and they don't want to believe in climate change. So today I'm going to talk about 4 information-related phenomena that don't fit with standard economic models and that are key to recent developments, like, for example, in social networking, e-commerce, and so on. And I sometimes thought that if you scanned my brain, you would see a matrix. This is a matrix, a 2x2 table, that you'd see a 2x2 table in my head, because I kind of think in terms of 2x2 tables. And these 4 phenomena that I'm going to talk about fit nicely into this 2x2 table. 2 of the things I'm going to talk about involve the desire to do something. 2 of the things I'm going to talk about involve the desire not to do something. 2 of the things I'm going to talk about involve obtaining information. And 2 of the things I'm going to talk about involve sharing information, when you have information, imparting that information to other people. So I'm going to start with the top left, the desire to obtain information, sometimes known as curiosity. And this is a topic I've done a lot of research on, some of which I'm going to talk about. But curiosity is specifically, the definition of curiosity is information, the desire for information for its own sake. It's specifically not for the reason that Stigler gave. If you want information because it's going to help you to make better decisions, that's not curiosity. Curiosity is when you want the information because you're curious about it. All right. In 1994, I wrote a paper titled The Psychology of Curiosity, a Review and Reinterpretation. And in that paper, I proposed an account of curiosity based on the concept of an information gap. And the idea is that you know that some information exists, but you don't know what the information is. That's an information gap. And that is what I propose creates curiosity. I also talk about how when you get closer to the answer, you get more and more curious. For example, have you ever experienced the tip of the tongue phenomenon? You know that there's a word out there, and you can't think of what the word is. It drives you crazy, right? And you get really curious. Head nod from the youngest member of the audience. That's a personal triumph. And Yeah, doesn't it? It drives you crazy, right? And you're really curious to know what it is. And that's an example of an information gap. You know the word is out there and you can't think of it. In this paper, I enumerate some of and try to make sense of some of curiosity's most salient features. One is its intensity, how intense curiosity can be, despite the fact that by its definition, you're curious not for any material gains that you expect to get from the information. Curiosity is also very stimulus dependent or transient, and perhaps maybe I'm in danger with the young audience, but since you brought it up, my great-grandfather, Freud, believed that curiosity was derivative of the sex drive. I think that's an absurd idea. But I do think that it's kind of uncanny, the parallels between curiosity and the sex drive. For example, curiosity is extremely stimulus dependent. You can become very curious if you have the right stimulus in front of you. It's also very transient. The moment the stimulus is gone, very often curiosity dissipates. Also, you can judge whether this is true for things other than curiosity or not, but curiosity also tends to be very disappointing when it's satisfied. Like you can be dying to get information, and then when you finally get the information, it's often very disappointing. There have been several clever studies of curiosity. One of them was by Kruger and Evans, the paradox of Alypius and the pursuit of unwanted information. Alypius is a guy, St. Thomas Aquinas wrote about his friend Alypius, who went to, in ancient Rome, he went to a gladiator show, and he didn't want to see the gore. So his friends dragged him to the show, but he covered his eyes, and he refused to look. But then the crowd roared at some point, and he was overcome by curiosity, and he looked, and then he deeply regretted having looked because he had good reason for closing his eyes. And in the last study in Kruger and Evans, they interview private eyes, and the private eyes are investigating couples where one member of the couple has been unfaithful, more stuff that's probably unsuitable for a young audience. I apologize. I didn't expect it. But the private eyes, do you want to see the photograph? The private eyes always ask the person, do you want to see the photographs? And always warn the person, you're not going to like what I have to show you. And they inevitably, they want to see them, and that's nice. But there's a bunch of more prosaic studies about the power of curiosity. A study by Chris Shee and Ruan titled Curiosity Kills the Cat. This is a series of studies, but in one, they put people in front of a bin of pens, and they tell them, some of these pens, if you click them, they administer an electric shock. And then they leave them in the room with the pens. What do you think they do? What would you do?
Click them.
You got it. That is exactly what they do. Now there's competition. The two of you have to answer a question now, because both. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly what they do. They click them, and they get an electric shock, because, like, I don't know exactly what the curiosity is. Is it? I guess it's like, what does the shock feel like, or does this pen administer a shock? I'm not sure. Curiosity is incredibly important on the internet, because the economic model of the internet is all about getting people to click on links, right? And so this is a bit self-promoting, just like the whole rest of the talk that I'm. Here's a article. I'm not even sure what's it in, but it's about Upworthy. Upworthy is a website that presents you with headlines, and it tries to get you to click on different headlines. And if you click, then it gets a little bit of money from whatever website it is you click on. Curiosity gap headlines hook us in. Here's what psychology says about our need to fill in the blanks. The news site Upworthy has earned a reputation for engineering curiosity gap headlines, story titles that coerce a click through just the right balance of information and intrigue, and posing a question or teasing readers with a potential mystery. Curiosity gap headlines can be 2 or even 3 sentences long. Some feel like story lead-ins in and of themselves. Exhibit A from a fall 2013 list of the site's greatest hits. This amazing kid just died. What he left behind is one-tacular. So that's supposed to elicit curiosity. After decades of research, behavioral scientists remain quite curious themselves about curiosity. A big reason the feeling is difficult to understand is because it runs counter to classical ideas about rational decision-making, which is what I've been telling you about. We're invested in the belief that people choose to do something in order to fulfill a goal, what economists would say, to maximize utility. There's no clear or extrinsic benefit or tangible utility to learning what the amazing kid who died left behind, but you clicked anyway. Still, psychologists have some theories. The leading one presented by me is known as the information gap theory. Theory proceeds in 2 basic steps. First, a situation reveals a painful gap in our knowledge. That's the headline, and then we feel the urge to fill this gap and ease the pain. All right. Very recent research. It's been rejected at 2 journals and is under review at a 3rd journal. Sometimes graduate students I work with, they look at my CV and they think, oh, he's the easy road to publication. And I warn them that that's not the case. And these 2 graduate students have gotten a little bit of that lesson. Anyway, this is using curiosity to counter health information avoidance. So people often avoid health information that could be useful for them to obtain. Like you're afraid you have some kind of health condition. So what do? You exactly don't get tested for it. I'm going to talk about that more later. And we study whether it's possible to use curiosity to overcome information avoidance. And in 5 studies, we manipulate curiosity in different ways. And in each study, the curiosity induction increases the fraction of people opting to obtain the kind of useful health information. In the last study, it actually affected their choice of a soft drink. In the first study, we want to expose people to their risk, the health risk that they're getting from drinking alcohol. And we ask them a bunch of questions about their alcohol consumption. And then we tell them, people in different countries consume alcohol in different ways. Would you like to know what kind of drinker are you? Are you a Russian drinker? Are you a French drinker? Are you an American drinker? But they know that along with that information about what type of drinker they are, they're also going to learn about their health risk from drinking. And that has the intended effect. Studies 2 and 3 are colon cancer risk assessment. We blur information or we have them guess information, and that leads them. I'm going to show you that study. Study 4 has to do with cancer risk factors, and study 5 has to do with the sugar content of drinks. Okay, here's study 2, just to give you a flavor of how this research works. In study 2, this is about curiosity prompting people to view colon cancer risk assessment scores. And here's the design. We recruit 2,250 people on the internet. We ask them questions about that are designed to allow us to assess their colon cancer risk, a whole bunch of different questions. We then tell them that we can calculate their risk score, like low risk or high risk. Then we do the curiosity manipulation. For some people, we don't do anything. For some people, we have them guess their score. We say, what do you think your score is? For other people, we give them the information, but we blur it. I'll show you that in a moment. And then we give them the option to view their risk score. So what we're trying to do is to use curiosity to get people to see their colon cancer risk so hopefully they'll go and get a colonoscopy, a test for colon cancer. Here are the two curiosity treatments. If you had to guess, what do you think your risk level is? Move the slider to match your guess from very much below the average risk to very much above the average risk. And then here's the blur condition. Your cancer score risk is. So this is designed to create a kind of an information gap, like you're close to getting the information, but you don't have it. Oh, and then we ask them, do you want to know what your risk is? And what we find is that when we blur the information or when we have them guess the information, they are more likely to ask to see the information than when we don't do either of those things. In the last study, we have people, we ask them to guess the sugar content of a soft drink like Coca-Cola. We first ask them, what's your favorite soft drink? Then we ask them to guess the sugar content. And if they say, and then they guess it, and then they say, then we ask them, do you want to see the sugar content? And so for half the people, we just tell them the sugar content. For the other half, we have them guess, and then we tell them. But and the people who guess the sugar content are more likely to then choose, they pay more attention to the information they get it. And that's a general property of curiosity. When you're curious about something, you pay more attention. And they are then more likely to choose a diet drink, a no-calorie drink over a caloric drink. Okay, enough about curiosity. That brings us to the, now I'm going to talk about the opposite diagonal, and this is the desire to not share information, and that is privacy. The privacy is the desire to not share information. Privacy is arguably the social science issue of the internet age. New technologies allow unprecedented collection of data, like cell phone locations. If you own a cell phone, your location's being tracked all the time. Credit card use, of course, every time you use a credit card. Highway tolls, click streams, and so on. And new businesses integrate this information and sell it to people who can exploit it. And data can be used for purposes other than intended. Here's a website called Real Age. You know what your chronological age is. Actually, when you get to be my age, you start to lose track. But you know what your age is, your chronological age is. But you might wonder, I know my chronological age is, but what is my health age? And of course, what are you secretly hoping? Would you like your health age to be younger or older? Younger, yeah, that's right. And you can find out on the Real Age website. And it asks you more and more questions, more and more personal questions. And you get desperate to get the answer. What is my age? And also what's called a sunk cost effect kicks in because you've spent so much time on this website. I need to know the answer to my question. And what's the purpose of Real Age? Well, the purpose of Real Age is to get health information from you and then use it. And if it turns out that you're really healthy, what are they going to try to sell you? What do you think? This is not for the young people. What are they going to try to sell you? Life insurance. Here's a more difficult question. If they find out that you're really unhealthy, for the oldest members of the audience, what are they going to try to sell you? Oh. Good guess. Very good guess. But no, an annuity. And an annuity is a contract that pays you a fixed amount until you die. And so that's a special financial instrument. And of course, if they think that you're going to die soon, you're a great deal for them because they won't be paying for very long. Once on the internet, information can't be erased, which creates what's called digital skeletons in the closet. And information is easily forwarded and shared, which leads to digital shaming. Does anyone recognize this picture? This is what's a woman who's known as the dog poop girl. She was on the subway in Korea, and her dog pooped, and somebody asked her to pick it up, and she refused. And this was all being filmed on a smartphone. And then it was publicized, and it went viral in Korea. And she became such an object of derision that she had to actually drop out of school. And I think she got plastic surgery because she was, this is a nice example of how severe the public becomes the judge and the jury, and how severe the consequences can be. There's a lot of suggestive evidence that people have difficulty navigating these complexities. There's voluntary posting of personal and even self-incriminating information. This is a website called 30 Reasons Girls Should Call It a Night, where, quote, girls, my mother trained me never to use that word, but at least not for a woman, but 30 Reasons Girls Should Call It a Night has to do a lot of things having to do with like excessive drinking and so on. Now, you should never post something that's too embarrassing or incriminating, because nowadays all employers are going to look up your information on the internet, like if you're on social websites and so on. Fewer than 3% of consumers read privacy policies on the internet. You know, you get onto a website that you want to access or an app, and you'll get the privacy policy. You have to click OK in order to access the website, right? Have you done that? Well, fewer than 3% of consumers read the privacy policy. 75% of consumers think that the existence of a privacy policy means that you're protected, when it's exactly the opposite. When you click OK, you're basically you're signing away all of your privacy rights. 54% of privacy policies are beyond the grasp of 57% of the internet population. Basically, they're written in legalese. If you tried to read them, you couldn't read them. It's been estimated that suppose people did read those policies, that the aggregate costs of people reading those policies would be $652 billion a year, and that's an old statistic. And it's US dollars. Here's a funny study that they did in London. It was back in the days when it was difficult to get public internet. They set up an internet website, and they had a policy that you had to click OK on to access it. But what you were agreeing to do was to sign over your firstborn child to the company. I guess that would be you. And you. So if your parent really, really needed to access the internet, and they didn't read the policy, sorry. All right. What would an economic model of privacy say? Suppose, sorry again, that should I mention my sexual preferences on Facebook? Maybe I'll find a lover, but what about my future job prospects? What if my parents happen to log on? And you should think about the benefits and the costs, right? Standard economics assumes that privacy preferences should be coherent, consistent, and based on underlying fundamental values. This leads to absurd things, like some economists have attempted to estimate the value that people put on privacy, and they've even come up with a number like 54 pounds. People value privacy at 54 pounds, which is an absurd, meaningless statement. Privacy preferences are unbelievably context dependent, which leads me to my next point. Behavioral economics, again, that's what I do, behavioral economics, applications of psychology to economics, assumes that people experience preference uncertainty. We often don't know what we want, and even when we experience things, we don't know how much we like them. Constructed preferences, that's the idea that when we don't know what we want or what we like, we search for cues in the environment to resolve the uncertainty, and that leads to a wide range of effects. I've published a lot of papers on privacy. This is a paper titled "The Impact of Relative Standards on the Propensity to Disclose." And this shows that people take their cues about what to reveal on the internet from what other people are revealing. and from past experiences. So suppose that you are on Facebook and you're trying to decide whether to reveal some information. How do you decide about that? Well, one of the cues that you use is what other people are revealing. If other people are revealing, it must be okay to reveal the information. Misplaced confidences, privacy, and the control paradox. We show that giving people more control over their privacy, when you give people control over the privacy, as like Facebook gives you control over your privacy settings, when you give people more control over their privacy, they don't usually exert that control. They don't take advantage of the control, but they become much more trusting and they reveal more information. And we refer to that as the control paradox. What's privacy worth? We show that people exhibit default effects and loss aversion with respect to privacy. In one study, we give people a gift card that's worth $10, and it has privacy protection on it. We can't tell how you're going to use the card. And then we say, do you want to trade it for a $12 gift card that has no protection? And very few people are willing to give up their privacy for an extra $2. But other people, we give the $12 gift card to, and we say, this has no protections. Are you willing to give up? Would you like instead the $10 gift card that has privacy protections? So basically, we're looking to see if extra privacy is worth $2. Is it worth $2? It depends on what you begin with. If you begin with privacy and no money, you stick with privacy and no money. You don't want to give up the privacy. If you begin with the extra money, then you don't want to give up the money. And we summarized a lot of this research, again, in a paper in Science titled Privacy and Human Behavior in the Age of Information. I'm going to show you one study. It's a representative study from another paper titled Strangers on a Plane. Is this microphone even working? Okay. Titled Strangers on a Plane, Context-Dependent Willingness to Divulge Sensitive Information. Why do you think it's called Strangers on a Plane? Any idea? It's about revealing private information. Well, it's kind of famous that people reveal private stuff to the person sitting on the stranger is sitting on the seat next to them on airplanes. And why is that? I think it's partly because they're intimate. They're right next to you, and that creates a feeling of intimacy, but you don't know them, which creates this feeling of anonymity. It's kind of a sweet spot of intimacy and anonymity at the same time. Of course, it's a play on the Alfred Hitchcock movie Strangers on a Train, which is highly recommend if you haven't seen it. So all of these studies, I'm going to just show you one, show that willingness to share information depends on arbitrary cues that often bear little connection or even a negative connection to the costs and benefits of sharing information. So in this study, we asked people embarrassing or incriminating questions. Have you ever smoked marijuana, which at the time was illegal everywhere in the United States? Have you ever cheated while in a relationship? Have you ever driven while you were pretty sure you were over the legal blood alcohol level? So some embarrassing things and some incriminating things. And we had in one condition, there was a professional website, Carnegie Mellon University Executive Council on Ethical Behavior. And actually, we got the provost to sign something saying that everything would be anonymous and confidential, private. Then we had a baseline condition where we just asked the questions. And then we had a condition, unprofessional website, how bad are you? And we ask, on all the websites, we ask exactly the same questions. And before we ran the study, we did a pretest, and we asked people which of these websites is less secure, which of them would be dangerous to post private information on, and everyone agreed that the professional one was much safer than the unprofessional one. But what did people actually do? Have you ever smoked marijuana? 26% on the professional one, 27% on the blank one, 35% on how bad are you? Have you ever cheated in a relationship? 19, 22, 31%. Driven drunk? 17%, 17%, 30%. This one really scares me. Have you ever tried to peek at someone else's email without them knowing? And I can't tell you how many of my friends have been done in by leaving their iPad exposed or their smartphone exposed. This shows you should not do that, because I think what do you think is the most realistic number of these? 29%, 27%, or 45%? What do you think is the most realistic?
45%.
That's right, 45. That's what I think too. I don't know that, but and we were worried. Maybe people thought, okay, how bad are you? I'm going to come across as really bad. So maybe they'd be tempted to say, oh yeah, I smoke pot, even if they didn't smoke pot. So we asked them, to what extent were you tempted to say yes to behaviors that you've never engaged in? And you can see that there's no pattern there. To what extent were you tempted to say no, to deny that you did things which you actually engaged in? And what you see is on the professional website and the baseline website, people report substantially more that they said no to things that they actually had engaged in, which supports your idea. Main conclusions from the privacy research. I think privacy is extremely context dependent. Sometimes you're really worried about it, and sometimes you don't care about it at all. People's willingness to share information varies in response to cues that have little connection to the true costs and benefits of sharing and withholding information. New technologies greatly magnify the risks, like internet postings can't be undone. New technologies eliminate danger cues, like, for example, email flaming. Suppose you have something unpleasant to say to somebody. Maybe it's something that you shouldn't even say to somebody else. How would you feel about saying it to them directly to their face? How would you feel about that? Difficult, right? What about sending an email? Much easier, right? And so people often, but which is more dangerous from a legal perspective? Is it more dangerous to tell somebody something that maybe you shouldn't say face to face, or is it more dangerous to send them an email? Yes.
Send them an email.
Good. You're very good. You know, it's really good that you know that early on, because of course email can end up in a trial or an inquisition or and so on, and also if you think about Facebook friends, sharing with Facebook friends, those aren't your real friends. I remember one time my daughter had a science project, and I think now I've been off of email, off of what was I talking about? Facebook for a decade. But back then I had, like anyone who friended me, I said yes. So I had about 600 friends. And my daughter needed to do a survey for science. And I posted the survey to all my friends, all my quote friends. Nobody completed the survey. And then I posted it to the neighborhood listserv, and probably like instantly 30 people completed the survey. And that told me something about who my true friends are. Anyway, I strongly believe that we have a need for new regulations and legal protections. We can't rely on people to protect themselves. Even though we have some extremely savvy young people in the audience, none of us are very savvy when it comes to privacy. We can't rely on individuals to protect themselves. Privacy research suggests that people don't care much about privacy until you ring alarm bells. And my own view, after having studied privacy for quite a while, I became convinced that the drive for privacy, the desire for privacy, is very weak, and it only arises when you kind of alert people to that there's a privacy threat. On the other hand, I think that the desire to reveal information is a much more powerful motive than the desire to conceal it. The last paper I wrote on this topic, which I'm about to talk about, is titled "The Drive to Disclose." Like a drive is like hunger, thirst. Those are drives. And I think that there's also an almost biological drive to disclose information. So that leads us to the third quadrant, which is the desire to share information. This is my Facebook feed back when I was on Facebook a long time ago, and you can see that lots and lots of people are posting lots and lots of information. There's on the internet. If you are a curious person, I highly recommend this, but not if you are young. But you might not realize, but there are all these confession websites, hordes of them, and where people, and I'm doing a bunch of research on confessions now that I'm not going to talk about. There's a couple of Reddit websites on which people confess things, and they have a what's that called? Anyway, they give us a handle, I think it's called. They give it. We have a way of communicating with them, and we send them a survey. So we've been surveying people who confess on anonymous websites. So let's see. Here's Post Secret. That's one of the many anonymous websites. And on Post Secret, I think you take a picture of a postcard. No, I guess this is a real postcard. You send in a real postcard with a confession. Here's one from Germantown, Maryland. I never really said anything to my parents about being bullied as a kid. If you get bullied, you should definitely tell your parents. I did not want to disappoint my parents, but in retrospect, I should have spoken up. I spent my honeymoon under the Golden Gate Bridge. I had thoughts of jumping from the same bridge after she admitted she cheated on me. It's been 7 years now, and I'm glad to be alive in my new marriage. These are classic confessions, really fascinating. But I think there's no economic model that can understand confessions, because a confession is, by its very nature, something that you shouldn't reveal. It's kind of incriminating or embarrassing. You should be motivated to not. It's usually adverse information to reveal. So the fact that people are so desperate to reveal it, that there are so many different websites, is a big challenge to economics. Another challenge to economics is all the ratings that people do on the internet. I wanted to buy a toaster on Amazon, and so I looked at different toasters. Here's an example of a toaster, and you can see that there are 739 people who bought this toaster and have gone out of their way to post a review. Now, you might not be that perplexed by the people who gave it a 5-star. They're grateful to the company, and they want to tell everyone else how great this toaster is, or the people who are really angry with a 1-star. But look at all the people who are giving it 4 stars or 3 stars or 2 stars. What's going on there? Like, why do people want to reveal that information? I personally think that we all have a desire to kind of make an imprint on the world. And some of the really bad people are very anonymous. I won't go into that now. But I think one of the motivations for these people is they just want to make a mark on the world, however trivial. They want the world to be different by the fact that they exist. I've done a bunch of research on sharing of information. Remind me of what the time.
It's like 6:30.
Okay, 6:30. Okay, good. And then we have time for Q&A? Okay, great. All right. Done a lot of studies since finishing the privacy research on the desire to share information. In a series of open-ended questions, we asked people to describe a time when they were dying to tell someone something. We asked them what motives drove this desire, if sharing could have been damaging, if they shared and why or why not, who they told and why. We also asked what happened when they shared, how the other person reacted, how sharing made them feel, if sharing was ultimately damaging. 83% of people surveyed were able to report something they were dying to tell someone. The number one thing was news about coworkers, relevant here, I guess. But 63% of the people who were dying to share that information didn't share it. A second thing that people were dying to share is job change, and you can see that a lot more people shared that. But what you see here is that there's a lot of stuff that people are dying to share with other people, and a lot of the stuff that they're dying to share that they don't end up sharing. Do we share positive stuff or negative stuff? The answer is it depends. Some of the stuff that we're dying to share is about ourselves, and some of the stuff that we're dying to share is about other people. About 48% is about other people, 51% is about yourself. 59% of the stuff about yourself is shared, 40% of the stuff about others. But if you look at whether it's positive or negative, the stuff you share about yourself is overwhelmingly positive. And that relates to like bragging. And that's another topic I've done a bunch of research on, is bragging. What we find is that when people are the braggers, they think that other people are going to enjoy the good information that they're sharing. But when other people brag to them, they find it very painful. So people don't seem to appreciate that other people are going to respond to their bragging as they will respond to other people's bragging. Maybe an unfortunate thing to bring up in a very self-serving talk that I'm giving. But if you look at other people, more than half of the stuff that people share about other people is negative, which I think is kind of interesting. Quotes from study participants. I think there are moments in life when you know something that no one else knows, or a handful of people. That moment feels special and amazing. That some truth about the universe or about your life or the lives of people close to you, you can feel special in that moment that it's only you. So there is a pleasure of knowing something that nobody else knows. But then this person continues, it's a woman, but then you want to share it because you want others to know. Maybe you don't want it or yourself to be forgotten, which I was talking about a moment ago. Perhaps the joy or sorrow you feel can be spread across people if you share, or it brings you closer to your friends, or by discussing it, you can make sense of it. This is an amazing quote. It's so many of the different reasons that people provide for why they want to share information. When I felt a great urgency to share, it was often about someone with whom I was close to, another person who knew these relationships and understood where the event fit in my life. I think a lot of sharing is to get on the same page with someone else. Think about how often the information you share is information that the other party already knows. Like you're with a family member and you say, oh, isn't that sunset gorgeous? And it's obvious, they've seen the sunset, it's obviously gorgeous, but what are you trying to do there? You want to be on the same page as they are. And a lot of sharing of information isn't giving new information to people, it's just to make sure you're both paying attention to the same thing at the same time. This one's a poet. This one's a psychologist. This one's a poet. Just little things, like just walking home tonight, and the streets were so quiet and dark, and the park was so beautiful. I wanted to share the experience. I didn't want it to just be mine. Isn't that beautiful? And then finally, the Economist. Information is currency, the coin of the realm. You negotiate position. This has to be a male. In fact, I think it is a male. You negotiate position with juicy information or honoring someone by sharing something exclusive. It's like a newspaper scoop in that way. You might wonder about gender differences. And what would you think? Do women share more or men? Oh, true. Okay. What do you think?
Women.
What do you think?
Women.
You're both right, but it's actually a little bit more complicated. But you're right. So we did a scenario study with CMU alums. We've done 4 different studies where we document the effect I'm about to show you. Participants are randomly presented with positive or negative versions of scenarios across 4 different domains. Like, for example, have you ever received strong criticism, that's a negative, or praise from a boss regarding your work performance? Let's say that they're in the criticism condition, then we ask them, have you ever shared that information with anybody? Or they might be in the praise condition, have you ever shared that information with people? So we have positive and negative versions, and we know whether people have shared it or not. For each scenario that a participant had experienced, I already told you this, they were asked to rate their desire to share the information with others and indicate whether or not they ultimately had shared the experience with others. And here are the results. Here's females. For positive information and for negative information, this is their desire to share. And you can see it's a little bit stronger for positive information than for negative information. But look at men. For men, positive is about the same as for females, but negative information is much lower. So the point is that women do share more information, but the reason that they share more information is because they share more negative information. Men and women share similar amounts of positive information. And this is true if you look at actual sharing as well. And that leads me to the final quadrant, which is the desire to not obtain information or information avoidance. Okay, there's an infinity of information that you could access, but you haven't been accessing it. That's not avoiding information. To say that you're avoiding information, you have to know that the information exists, and it has to be either costless to acquire or, in some cases, even costly to avoid. People will incur costs to not get information. People have many different methods of avoiding information. You can just plug your ears or not look. That would be physical avoidance. Let's say your significant other is trying to tell you something and you don't want to hear it. What do? You might not pay so much attention. Or the information, you might not be able to avoid paying attention to the information, but I already talked about this. If you can't avoid the information, you might process it in a motivated fashion, in a biased fashion. If the information is something that you don't want to think about what the implications are, you confront it with, must I believe it? If you want to believe the information, can I believe it? And then when all else fails, you can always resort to forgetting what you learned. This is a study that I did of what we call the ostrich effect. This is from a panel of 1.1 million people who have retirement accounts on a website called Vanguard. And we observed every day for 2 years, 2007 and 2008, whether they logged in to their account and whether they traded. These people almost never traded. It was always just looking up the value of their account, how much money do I have I saved so far? And we focus on a random subsample of 100,000 people who had paperless accounts. So the only way that they get information about their finances is by getting onto the internet. They don't get paper statements. And here's the main punchline. What did the market do on the previous day? If the market was good on the previous day, then they are more likely to log in. If the market was bad, they're less likely to log in. Does anybody here have an investment account, or can you relate to that? I exhibit this pattern completely, and I don't think it's only because I want to confirm my own research findings. How many ostriches are there? An ostrich is someone who looks when the market is up but doesn't look when the market is down. If we look at people who have enough logins so we can determine whether they are ostriches or not, 80% of people are ostriches. But suppose that you are a very conservative investor and all you have is bonds. You have no stocks at all. So you have no stocks, all bonds. Suppose the stock market goes up Is that good news for you or bad news for you? Bad news. Why? Who said bad? Yeah, you're missing out, right? Everyone who had stocks, just their money, they just got wealthier. You didn't get wealthier. So it's bad news for you. And so what would you expect if we looked at people who have 100% bonds, no stocks at all? We observe exactly the opposite pattern, 70-30. When the market goes up, the bondholders don't look. And when the market goes down, the bondholders log in. Some other things. People were more likely to log in when the market was down on the previous day, week, or month. And these tendencies are highly correlated. People who were ostriches in 2007 were more likely to be ostriches, also much more likely, in 2008. So ostricity seems to be a stable trait. And I was curious about whether there really is a word, ostricity. So I Googled ostricity, and it took me to my paper. So, so ostricity is a new term. It's useful, I think. People logged in on the weekend. The market is closed, and yet lots of people logged in multiple times when the market was closed. And who did that? If the market had been up on the previous day or week, when the market was closed, people logged in multiple times. When the market was down in the previous week, people didn't log in at all on the weekend. What's going on? Well, do any of you have a piggy bank? Yeah? What do you do with your, once you've saved a bunch of money, do you ever shake your piggy bank? No. Do you ever count the money in it? Okay, yeah. And so what's happening when the market is closed? Why are people logging on multiple times? I think it's a lot like counting the money in your piggy bank. You know it's there, but I have a lot of money. I want to count it. I want to count it again. And okay, men log in a lot more than women, but men are much more likely to be ostriches. So men log in selectively when the market is up, and we don't log in at all, like very, very little when the market is down. But we log in so much more when the market is up that we log in total more than women. Ostricity is positively correlated with the size of your portfolio. The more money you have, you would think, oh, I need to be impartial. I need to be unbiased because I have lots of money that's at stake. No. People who have a lot of money are more likely to be ostriches. Okay, I'll skip some stuff. This is from a website, which actually, this is very much like the Real Age, but it's called a website, an insurance company called Vitality. This is the front page on their app, and it shows you what your health age is. But if you want to, you can hide it. And so one thing I asked the executives at this company, I asked them, is the vitality age typically older or younger than your actual age? And they said, it's actually older. And I said, why would you do that? People aren't going to want to get on your website. And then they said, oh, they can hide the information if they don't want to see it. I said, I want to see the data. So here it is. This is the difference between your vitality age and your real age. This is if your vitality age is the same. This is if your vitality age is older. But this is how many people hide the website. The older your vitality age is, the more likely you are to click on the hide button. Almost at the end, don't worry. Information avoidance matters. Here's a book about climate change titled Don't Even Think About It, Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. The bottom line is that we do not accept climate change because we wish to avoid the anxiety it generates. Basically, this book says that climate change, people aren't dealing with climate change in part because they're avoiding thinking about it and avoiding information about it. This is a study with parents with children who are autistic, and they are often the last to recognize that their child has a problem. And when we ask the parents, thinking back before Johnny was diagnosed, do you think that at some level you suspected that Johnny had a serious condition but preferred not to know? And a majority of parents say, yes, I just didn't want to know. Okay, understanding the perils and pitfalls of the age of information requires a deep understanding of how humans deal with information. There was once a hope that exposure, the internet, exposure to more information would make us smarter, more productive, and bring about a new era of democracy. And now we have fears that computers are taking over jobs, privacy is a luxury of the past, relationships are being transformed in a negative way by social media, and democracy is getting poisoned rather than enriched. And let me close with another quote from George Stigler. One should hardly have to tell academicians that information is a valuable resource. Knowledge is power, and yet it occupies a slum dwelling in the town of economics. Our understanding of economic life will be incomplete if we do not systematically take account of the cold winds of ignorance. And I think to do that, we really need a new economics of information.